Bill, I always enjoy talking with you about your favorite topic, Japan, your professional interest and passion in your life. And since I made a brief visit over there, I've become even more aware of the richness of that culture and some of the challenges and problems that are connected with it. So I'm really pleased to talk with you a little bit about it. I know one of the things that you have done in your life is even learn to speak Japanese and to read Japanese, the Chinese characters which they imported into their country and which make it extremely difficult. But how was it studying the language and poring over those symbols, the characters from China?
Well, it tends to shape your mental outlook and give you a certain viewpoint that perhaps not everyone shares. But the Japanese language is a very important asset in understanding the culture. There are so many phrases, so many words that give you a glimpse of what life is really like in that culture that is impossible to decipher without. That I must admit to a certain sense of appreciation for all of that.
Mm-hmm. I was asking some students that I was interacting with, can you speed read Japanese? And they said, well, yeah, you could, but they found it harder than doing it in the English they also knew.
Sure.
But they said that they could speed read it. I thought that was phenomenal.
I read at a turtle pace, however, in Japanese.
Yes, you're not speed reading
no,
it.
no,
yeah.
no.
I think you'd have to grow up there and live there to do it.
You do find with the language, though, the language shaping the mental outlook. For example, even in the handwriting, there is a fixed pattern and an improved way of writing a character. You just don't randomly make the strokes of a character. There's a kind of discipline that my language is good enough in Japanese to see how one's mind is at least shaped in part by the discipline.
I tried to probe that, and it's an extremely important part. What I want to focus on in this whole program, Bill, is education in Japan, and this really fits in to the whole thing, it seems to me. But I spent just a brief period of time in China also, and I kept asking that same question about does the fact that you grow up without an alphabet and you have characters in which each character symbolizes a reality, then what does that do to your mental outlook? I mean, do you end up thinking? You know, my theory woes be that it makes you somehow more imaginative. They say as soon as you see a character, they see a picture in their mind. You know, where often that does well. You can't think without images, so I don't want to lose sight of that general linguistic principle. But somehow it seems different to me.
Interconnectedness and relationships more quickly appear with Japanese Chinese characters. For example, in defining words, there are what the Japanese refer to as radicals, which help you characterize or define certain characters. And you can see, for example, the character, the radical for wood, appearing in a variety of words, or for the character for metal or iron. You know immediately as soon as you see that part of the character that there's some sort of relationship, and so an image, a picture, comes to mind much more readily than seeing the word metal or the word wood in the English.
Well, it just has to. Language shapes us. We know that for sure. I mean, if you
the discipline that comes from it.
Yeah, as Heidegger said, he thought you could philosophize only in Greek and German. The only two languages you could do philosophy in. Well, a little overstated, but it does bring out the point that the language helps you to see nuances that another language obscures.
I've found also that in terms of the language, certain words. In English, there will be one or very few expressions. In Japanese, there are oftentimes multiple expressions, which give you a variety of nuance, of impression that differs from what you have in English.
Remember in the book The Japanese by Edwin Reischauer, isn't it? A classic work on the Japanese. He was lamenting the fact, as I recall it, that Japan, when they imported the Chinese characters, which I'm linking around the 9th century, had other available options. In other words, there was Western alphabets that they could have imported, and he was lamenting the fact that they had chosen that. But then I said that to some people in Japan, and I think take it Reischauer as a Westerner, and that and some people in Japan took tremendous offense at that because they treasured the characters. And I talking to a young man in China too about the same thing, and he says, Oh, he was incensed by that. The characters are everything. He would never give that up. That's the culture is contained in that.
Well, from the latter part of the 19th into the 20th century, there have been various moves to make substitutions and to put a Roman alphabet in, or to use something like Esperanto or such. And those ideas do not go very far because they lack the sense of identity. The language is what makes Japan unique. It's what makes her special. Mm-hmm. And I think we're probably a long ways away from seeing that change, although they do introduce a whole variety of foreign language words into their vocabulary.
Yes, they do. I was told this, and you can put a nuance on it if you will, but that when foreign words come in, they are written in a different script. Yes. Therefore, forever after, you would know how to distinguish these foreign imports from the original characters and the words that were indigenous, the concepts that were indigenous.
It's a different script because you have to identify the pronunciation. If you simply used a Chinese character and said, okay, I'm going to use this character for the word, for example, ice cream, aisukrimu in Japanese, it would be very difficult to make that kind of transition, so they use a katakana script to sound out aisukrimu.
So in the daily newspaper, you can see these different scripts, right? You see the character, and then you see that other script that they use side by side. Mm-hmm. Well, Bill, let's look at this whole education process and so on. Can we look at it in some historical perspective? I mean, I know that there were strong Buddhist influences on the educational system within Japan, that the monasteries carried culture and education and ran schools and so on through an important part of their history, very influential when it was introduced in the 6th century A.D. into Japan. That would be one of my own touchstones for how this educational thing is developed. Maybe you want to expand on that.
Historically, the Japanese have had a considerable attraction for and appreciation of education. The quality of Japanese education has not suddenly emerged in post-war Japan. As a matter of fact, a British scholar by the name of Ronald Orr looked at education in Japan in the early 1800s and comes away with the view that the level of literacy and the level of scholarly accomplishment in the Japanese educational process was not that different than what we had in the European field of things. He points out that as early as the early 1800s, some 40% of all males received formal educational training and were literate, 15% of the females.
You're talking, what year is this you're talking about?
1800s.
In 1800, give me those statistics
40%
again.
of all males and 15%
were
of
literate.
all females were literate and received
do
formal.
you have any sense how that compared with Europe at that time?
It probably would be less, but not as dramatically as we might think.
Right. My sense was that it was rather comparable at that time. But
I would. That's my sense of it also. In the 1850s and 60s. Japan suddenly decided she wanted to make major changes and to develop both in the sense of a sort of defensiveness as well as seeing what was happening in the rest of the world.
Bill, can we just link that for a minute with these sort of periods, the Tokugawa period, which ended in 1868, is that right?
Yes, that's the end of the Tokugawa period, which was a 270-year period in which Japan developed internally, but externally was very limited. She was closed off except for the last few years of that.
Yeah, very definitely on purpose. In other words, the rulers wanted to close off from the rest of the world. And I think that's what people sort of remember. Japan is an isolated place and not open to the Western world. They were very unhappy with the missionaries who had come there, St. Francis Xavier, and wanted to smash the Christians, persecute them, and so on.
An attempt to develop internally rather than externally. And some suggest that there's still that kind of mentality there, an internal rather than external mentality.
So, and then we're in 1868, and then now we're getting a new sense of education.
They began vigorously to develop the educational process, and a whole ministry of education, a whole new series of schools and endeavors, incidentally depending a great deal upon American and European educators to help develop that process. By the turn of the century, most all Japanese, 95% of the young people, were in formal schools and literate. So that into the 20th century, we're dealing with a country whose level of education competency is comparable to that of the Western world. In the post-war period, again, another new thrust towards education and a sense of appreciation which, quite frankly, goes beyond the average sense of appreciation in the Western world.
Can we take you back to the early 20th century? We're in what we call the Meiji period here.
Towards the end of the Meiji period, which lasts until 1912.
Till 1912, right. And so in that period, they were, since 1868 to 1912, they were trying to be more open to the West. And
much more.
My remembrance is that they actually systematically searched out what was best in the Western world, a very conscious, careful search, and to figure out which kind of constitution they wanted or which educational system worked the best, or whatever it was. They'd go out, find it, and then bring it into Japan. So I think that represents
factories,
a general
economies.
The general characteristic, does it not, of the Japanese of being systematic and careful and in their relationship with the rest of the world.
Very systematic in the borrowing. What they did was to take what applied to them, what would serve them, and then modified that and shaped it in the Japanese image and used it quite effectively. Many of your leading institutions, your college and universities, have connections, either some founded by Western missionaries or Western educational experts, or those that were in definite Japanese control, influenced, shaped by Westerners who were brought there and paid a very good salary to help develop the Japanese system.
And then when we move into the post-war period, as you had indicated, you get a even strong emphasis on math and technology and preparation. I was thinking of reading somewhere, someone told me in Japan, talking about the pressures that the average family or worker would be under, not only pressures at work, but very concerned about getting his 4 or 5-year-old son into the right kindergarten.
Yes.
Because so that they would get started on a proper track here that would end up with the right university and therefore the best corporation. I think that idea of getting into the right school, well, we have that in the United States, and our best students might want to get into Harvard or the Ivy League schools, or it's more important to go to Michigan and Bowling Green or something. It really pales compared to what they have in Japan in terms of the prestigious schools.
No comparison at all. My wife, teaching an English language course, was surprised when one of the mothers had to drop out because her 4-year-old daughter was prepping for entry into kindergarten, and she needed the extra time to help the daughter in the preparation there.
Unbelievable.
I've seen that firsthand, but the sense of appreciation for education is very strong, and I would have to say that one of the things that strikes me about it is not only the sense of appreciation, but the level of expectation. Japanese teachers, parents, schools, the society as a whole expects a far higher level of performance than does the average American institution. And I have to say very honestly, Jim, I'm critical of the American educational system on that score, because I don't think we hold up for our students enough of a level of expectation and provide them the kind of help. We allow students to opt to operate on a much lower level than they are capable of. In Japan, that does not happen.
And I think the mothers in the family are extremely important in all of this. There was a time that evidently Japan was a matriarchal society, and I know that one of the prime gods or deities is a goddess, the sun goddess, and so you have that sense. And women in Japan, while they are in many ways second-class citizens and deprived, I think they play a tremendous role in this educational process. As I understand it, the mothers would be the ones who would make sure that the youngsters prepared well and did their homework and were performing well in school. And there would be none of this idea of sort of taking the side of your offspring against the teacher or anything like that, but that loyalty to the school and loyalty to the educational process indicates that the student must conform, and that the mother is going to make sure that that happens.
Well, it's to bring honor to the family. It's to bring level of expectations there. It's not a hideous system, however, in the sense that children are not abused by it, but the level of expectation is very, very high. Teachers will meet with parents, particularly mothers. Fathers are at work; they're not there on a great regular basis. My insight, both personal and professional, I had 2 children who spent about 15 months in a typical Japanese elementary school.
Your children
yes,
did.
And attended the parent-teacher meetings, participated. It was a thing where any typical class would have a meeting at least once a month of parents, and the teachers would work with the parents, translated mothers, and just help the children much more and expect much more than you see here in this system.
What about this popular impression we have of too much pressure on the Japanese children, that they, at too young an age, they're constantly forced to work, there's long hours, there's these expectations, and that it's putting great pressure on them? I know that there is quite a suicide rate, although I know overall the suicide rate in Japan is not much higher than it is in the Western world, but I think there's a slightly higher suicide rate among students, and that some simply aren't able to keep up with this tremendous stress.
That's the downside of what we've been talking about. Some children are unable to handle that pressure. Some families and teachers exert more pressure than is necessary. I've often thought if there could be some sort of working out of the American system and the Japanese system, it would be an advantage here. I think in the Japanese case, for instance, the pressures are such that students don't have a chance to relax. They don't have a chance at times to be as creative as I would like to see them be. I preferred to have my children study mathematics, science, some other things in the Japanese system. As far as history and certain other things, I think the American system is better because you have a chance to think more rather than simply memorize and regurgitate.
This takes us to the university level, Bill, where things are a little strange, I think. The first thing is that one has to try to get into the best schools, and this is clearly ranked. As I remember, the University of Tokyo is first, and that's where you want to get to, and that's how you get into the best corporate positions. Then University of Kyoto would be second, and then I was told also the Sophia University, run by the Jesuits in Tokyo, and I got a chance to talk to some students there, was ranked up, they claimed, in the top 4 of the private schools that were operating. But everyone seemed to be very clear on this listing, where you get a lot of argument in the United States, I suppose. For them, the listing seems to be a consensus point, and you know which schools you want to get into and what track you want your youngsters to be on.
Sure. Very heavy pressure that way. It's a system that perhaps is easy for some people because there's not a great deal of difference of opinion. If you like a unanimity of opinion, you'd like the Japanese system, but it does put undue pressure on students, particularly when they're not able to measure up, and that's where a suicide rate oftentimes. The entrance exam, or what they call shikenjigoku, entrance exam hell, is very real in the part of the lives of the students. Japanese students at the elementary, junior, and senior high level work, I believe, much more rigorously than they do at the college, than they do in the United States. But once you pass and are admitted to that university, I believe the average Japanese college student works far less than his American counterpart.
I know, it's really surprising, and I think Americans probably have trouble appreciating that, but in talking to the students, I got that impression that in the first couple years is when you really goof off. It's like a period of time you've been through this rigorous exams, this examination
decompression.
Hell. Yeah, and that for the first couple years of college, therefore, it's like your vacation, your only vacation in your whole life, I suppose. Your only time away from the pressure, and so there's a lot of partying that goes on, and not a lot of studying. But then I got the impression they got more serious in their last 2 years of college, because now they're getting ready for the new pressure of entering the corporate world and being able to get the best positions again.
That does occur, but I think the pressures in the American system are greater, far greater on the junior and senior level in college than they are in Japan, because, first of all, if you have been selected to attend Tokyo University, or depending on the corporation, there are certain connections with other universities and colleges, they know that you have a certain amount of accomplishment, a certain level. They know you have certain connections. And there's a kind of inbreeding here that your fellow classmates that you've partied with at Tokyo University, you will have access to them, whether they're in government ministries or other businesses. And that, quite frankly, is oftentimes more important than how you might score in some exam or what you might know about some subject matter.
In fact, I was told that the corporations then sort of do have their own educational programs, and when you do join up, they have their own ways. They're going to train you in the ways of that particular company because they're specific to them. They know their work and effective, and they aren't all that confident of what you learned in the university.
That too, but also another factor, Jim. The average high school graduate in Japan comes far better prepared than his average American high school counterpart in terms of basic mathematics, science, reading, writing skills, and quite frankly is much better trained for the workforce than you find happening in this country.
There's a downside to all of this, I think, Bill, that we ought to look at, and that is what I might call the creativity factor. Whenever you get a system that is so conformist-oriented and where a society in which people are not allowed to stand out and the nail that stands out gets hammered down, I think you have a question of how much creativity there is. And I believe that this shows up at the graduate level then, where it's not as clear that the Japanese system works as well here. That maybe when we would compare Japanese graduate schools with our graduate schools, then maybe we would find ourselves looking much better, and it could be the creativity factor that's really critical in that.
No question at all. I think about that. It's hard to get Japanese to be willing to step out and be independent and to think outside of the normal realm. I've seen it in many different ways. The students, in the educational process, the best way to get ahead in the educational process is to emulate your professors, to write in their style, to research what they've researched. It's true in Japanese art. The best art traditionally seems to be that which mimics the masters. And that sort of approach does not provide for a great deal of creativity. That isn't to say, there are many creative Japanese and many things outside that system, but per capita, I think there's more of a tendency to look at how it's done in the past rather than say, I'm going to strike out on totally new ground.
And it seems the way they've overcome that then is their periodic looks at the outside world to see where creative people have taken them and the new innovations and so on, and then to import them, and as you said, to do it under the aegis of their own culture and have it be shaped by their national consciousness.
Great deal of dependence upon the Chinese earlier, and then on the Western world in the 19th, and again in the 20th century.
Let's talk about access questions. I remember reading at some place that the most prestigious universities cost less than those universities that are not so highly thought of. I thought that's an interesting thing, a sort of contrast to what we would have here in the United States. And so I guess that says something about what they value then. They want to bring this cream of the crop forward and make sure they have every opportunity.
Well, I'm not sure that's the reason the system operates that way. Entrance and access is not directly keyed to cost. It doesn't cost less because it's better or anything like that. It depends upon the economic support structure, and obviously the private are going to cost more than the public. But in Japan, it is true that Tokyo University, for example, is much less expensive than, say, Keio or Waseda or Sophia that you mentioned in terms of what it's going to cost the students, but it's paid for out of public funds. It is truly open. The examination system and the entrance system in the Japanese credit, you don't have to be from the right family, the right connections. It doesn't make a difference if you were captain of the football team or if you were a cheerleader or sat on the first chair in the violin section or whatever. Your entrance is dependent upon what you do in this examination, and it has a very leveling effect. So someone from a poor economic condition, someone from a family that's not part of the establishment has every bit as much chance as does his more affluent, more strategically placed counterpart.
That's been one of the great changes in Japan, it seems to me, in terms of the not having heredity dictate how you move forward, but having competitive exams. It's something that comes from Confucianism in China, and has always had the effect of bringing forward an elite that is better educated and better informed, and therefore in most cases more efficient or more helpful in moving the society forward.
Historically, Japan had a hereditary system back during the shogunal periods, back from 11th through the 19th century, and I think they saw in that the inherent difficulties and thus developed a greater sense of appreciation for recognizing talent and allowing talent to develop. That talent, however, is kept in check by the system and by the all-pervasiveness of the Japanese culture, which oversees everything.
And is so conformist in its attitude and so on. Oh, Bill, as always, you bring such a wealth of knowledge to all this. I just love to talk with you about all this. We've been talking about Japan. We've been talking about the educational factor in the country, and we've seen certain downside in a way. We've seen a lot of pressure, maybe increased suicides in terms of, as you call, the examination hell period, great pressure, and also questions about how their creativity and the conformism often forcing people to imitate their teachers or the great artists or the tradition and not keeping them open to new developments. On the other hand, they've done a tremendous job. It's a well-educated country. They've dealt well with literacy. They have, score highest on math exams and really have done a good job. And part of that is the family structure, the role of the mother, and making sure it all happens. And I have the feeling that there's a lot we in the United States could learn by examining that whole system in greater detail.